other question about the functional trainings. What are the specific principles of for designing and practicing them for specific soccer players?
So other things to take into account with soccer players specifically is there's a lot of conditioning that needs to be accomplished with these athletes. And that being said, we need to take into account the amount of fatigue that they have, but also we need to figure out when we're going to be performing our functional training beyond their conditioning. So it, what I mean by that is if we perform a relatively heavy lower body training session, we also need to consider the fact that their legs are going to be tired and sore, or possibly sore, going into that conditioning session. So they may not be able to condition as well when they are tired. So we need to consider the number of matches that they've played. If we're talking about the highest level in terms of La Liga, Premier League, any other professional level, they may play, I believe the maximum that a team would play is maybe 2 or 3 matches per week. So we need to take into account how strenuous were those matches. What were the player loads that they experienced during it? Because maybe we play an opponent that is at the top of the table, but we may also play an opponent that's at the bottom of the table that may not be as strenuous to play against. So individual players, what we have to consider is how much distance did they cover? So if we talk about a position like a midfielder, especially an outside midfielder, they have to cover possibly upwards to 10 to 12 kilometers per match. So when they do that, they're going to be more tired than a lot of the other athletes. So it's the style of play has to be taken into account as well. There are teams, as you know, that will play more of a conservative attack, where they will pass the ball back with their defenders a lot more than sending the ball through or over the top to their forwards and their strikers. So we have to consider how much stress that the player has been under when we are designing their training programs. We also need to consider the fact that every athlete is going to be unique, and not every athlete has the same competencies with exercises. So an example would be, maybe with one athlete, I use a jump squat to develop power for them. Well, maybe that works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. Maybe we use a power clean with another athlete, or a jerk with another athlete. The idea is that all of these exercises are geared toward developing power, but not every athlete is going to respond the exact same to each exercise. So again, those are just a few principles, but all of these things need to be taken into account when designing the training programs.
Dr. Suchamel, we had a question from our follower. What are the facts that influence on the duration of training sessions?
Individual training sessions. Well, a lot of things that we have to deal with, whether it's here or whether it's elsewhere in the world, we have to consider how long practice sessions are going to be, and how much time the athlete has throughout the day. So let's say, for example, we have a morning training session, and we have an evening training session with the team. Really, then the only time that they could do a resistance training session would be sometime in the middle of the day. The problem is that because they may be tired from the first practice, they may be tired later on, so we want them to recover for the second practice. there's a lot of stress that has to be managed there, and it can all be effectively done as long as the coaches work together in terms of designing the actual training program. So how is it going to affect it? Well, if the morning practice is really stressful, then our weight training session later on may have to be lower intensity to compensate for that. Versus more in the off season when there is probably less intense practices, that's when we can be a little bit more intense with or higher intensity with our weight training sessions. So we have to take into account both what's going on in practice and what we're trying to accomplish in the weight room. So the duration of those sessions is going to be modified by the other training stresses that they have already experienced or will experience later on in the day.
Dr. Suchamel, while you were answering the question about mask trainings, we got a problem with the sound, and some followers asked us to ask you again that question. And please, would you mind repeating us your answer?
Sure. Yeah, what masks are designed or proposed to do is to simulate altitude training. So because altitude training is going to develop different cardiovascular adaptations, theoretically, these masks are supposed to simulate that. The issue is that there's not a lot of research to support that they actually do what they say they're going to do. It may just be a fitness fad, if you will, to say this is what they're supposed to do, but they may not actually do that. So we need to be careful with fitness masks because I have not seen much literature to suggest that they are going to be beneficial. You may also get, especially with high-end elite athletes, is they may be sponsored by these companies. To say, okay, we're gonna sponsor you, but we need to have people see you training in this mask. So they may do that from time to time, but I'll say that it becomes more difficult to breathe with that mask on. So I don't think that there are as many benefits to them as people think.
So you don't recommend masks for athletes?
I typically don't recommend masks for athletes, no.
Thanks.
If they want to
okay.
get their adaptations for something like that, they should actually, I would probably tell them to invest more in a sleep chamber rather than an altitude mask.
Thanks. If there was any questions that I skipped it unwanted, please, dear followers, repeat it for me, and I'll ask it from Dr. Suchamel. Dr. Suchamel, what are the positive effects of functional trainings on professional soccer? I'm asking it because I've already asked it, but because of the sound problem, I need you to have a summary of your answer again.
Just to be clear, functional training is going to be highly effective for soccer players. First and foremost, we can increase their strength. This will help them stay healthy, but also be resilient to injury. It's going to help them hold off defenders. And strength also lays a foundation for a lot of other benefits that we may have. Functional training, in our definition, is going to help them sprint faster. Every athlete is going to be competing with another athlete to get to the ball when it's on the pitch at a certain time. The athlete that gets there faster wins the ball, generally. They are going to be able to jump higher. Jump higher, jump farther. And what this will also be contributed to is they are more powerful. More powerful athletes can complete different tasks on the field to a faster and greater extent. We can sprint faster. We can change direction better as well. So our ability to cut on the field ends up being improved, so we can make certain cuts that we may not have been able to make as effectively before. In addition to that, we can increase our conditioning or improve our conditioning. Soccer is unique in the fact that the majority of the tasks on the field are strength power oriented, in the sense that kicking, passing, defending, all of these tasks of sprinting, jumping, shooting, etc., all of these are going to be strength power oriented. So when it comes to conditioning, it's unique because we spend a lot of time sprinting, but the times that we're not sprinting, we're not really jogging. It's more of a walk and very, very slow jog. So we need to make sure that we're going to be specific with the conditioning that we give them as well. But I saw a comment down there. Another thing that this is going to do for us is it's going to help us become more resilient to injury. So there's plenty of research out there now to suggest the idea that functional resistance training will help us become more resilient to injury, in the sense that we can decrease the injury rates to a point. We can't fully prevent injuries, but we can decrease injury occurrence, and that will help all of our top-end athletes stay on the pitch longer, or be able to be on the pitch to a greater extent. And by doing this, we can benefit the team, because the best players are going to be on the field a lot more.
Dr. Suchamel, you told us about decreasing the injuries by help of functional training. And the other question is, how is the exact mechanism of this matter? How does the functional training help to decrease the probability of injuries?
So really what functional training is going to do is it's going to strengthen the tissues within the body to become more resilient to the injury. We put them under a certain stress so that the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments all adapt to resilience to injury. So I will say that we really haven't talked about it all that much, but strong is one thing. Being mobile with mobility and being strong within those ranges of motion are going to be equally as important. So typically when we are performing resistance training, we emphasize full range of motion movements with large muscle groups, because that is what is going to then transfer to...
Again, Dr. Tim Suchamel, for accepting our invitation. We had quite a useful conversation, and this cooperation wouldn't end here, and it would be continual, and motor football fans can have benefits from your knowledge and your personality here. Again, thank you, Dr. Suchamel.
I actually saw one on there that I think someone had asked about the benefit of functional training for like a teen or adolescent population.
Okay, would you mind answering that?
Yeah. So it's incredibly important to start athletes early when it comes to functional training. For example, I was fortunate enough when I went to the UK to go to the training academy for Liverpool. So we were able to go see all of their facilities and discuss training with their coaches. And one of the things that they emphasize is that every single youth team, adolescent team that they had, all the way up to their Premier League team, did some sort of resistance training. So just to note is that functional training in this regard can be very beneficial for athletes who are younger, especially when they're younger, but also when they start to get older. Keep in mind that a myth that functional training or resistance training is going to stunt the growth of an individual. That's not true. The only way that that would happen is if you're using weights that are inappropriate for the athlete's abilities. So if they're lifting weights that are going to be max effort weights and they're only 8 years old, then that's going to be detrimental to them. My recommendation would be to start off very basic with these athletes with things like body weight exercises. And once they become competent in the movements that they're able to perform, then they should be able to start to add smaller resistance. This is where you start to use things like bands, kettlebells, dumbbells. Um, Once you get beyond that, then you can start to use more free weight type training movements, loaded squats, jumping movements. So when we're kids, we're always jumping around. We're doing plyometrics and we don't even know that we're doing plyometrics when we're younger. Um, so we're able to withstand that, but we also need to understand that there is a process here that is long term. If you think about some of the athletes that sign with these bigger clubs, they sign when they're 7 or 8 years old, and then they're within the system for a long, long period of time. So functional training is certainly beneficial for these athletes. They just need to understand that it is going to be a process, that we start very basic and then we start to get more complex as they get older.
Thanks, Dr. Suchamel. Would you mind giving us a highlight and summary of what you told us about functional training for us, just in a few minutes?
So again, what functional training is it's going to be sport-specific training that will allow us to improve the fitness characteristics of the athletes so that we can improve their performance on the field. It's going to enhance our ability to gain strength. It's going to make us sprint faster, jump higher, change direction better, and help us be more resilient to injury. We can go through and perform functional training with a variety of means. We can do it with body weight, resistance bands, plyometrics, free weight training, weightlifting movements if we want to, like the clean and jerk, snatch, those types of variations. We can also do it with a limited amount of equipment. So when we design programs, coaches just need to be creative in the sense of what characteristics am I trying to build and when. Typically in the off season, we focus on developing the musculature from a size but also architecture standpoint. As we get closer to the season, we focus on gaining strength. And as we get really close to the season and in season, we're focusing on developing power. The main difference between something like this and CrossFit would be that functional training is going to have more structure to it, where, like I mentioned in the off season, we may have more training sessions there focused on developing specific characteristics. And as we move closer to the season, we switch our emphasis in terms of characteristics, but we still provide them with structure. We have to consider the fact that CrossFit training is not going to be as beneficial, primarily because there's less of an emphasis on what is being developed at that time. There's also less structure there in terms of what exercises are going to be used to develop the training characteristics that we're trying to get to. Other things that we have to consider is how many competitions do they have over the course of the week. We need to make sure that we take into account the athlete's previous experience. Do they have limitations? Do they have previous injuries that we have to consider? We also have to know that the coaches and the sports medicine staff should also be a part of these decisions. So as a sport performance enhancement group, things like previous injuries need to be considered with the sports medicine staff and the physios to determine if it's going to be beneficial to continue the type of training that we are doing, or if we need to emphasize different types of training. So when it comes to the creativity, we need to be very creative in what we're trying to do at that time, primarily because we have a lot of different means to develop the same thing. It doesn't have to be a loaded jump. It can be a power clean. It can be a pull from the floor to develop power. A jump shrug, for example. We can use plyometrics to develop these characteristics. So, but all in all, what functional training is going to give us is it's going to allow us to prepare the athletes to be successful in their sport. Specific to soccer, we're going to be able to kick harder and have a higher ball velocity. We're going to be able to resist defenders on the ball. We're going to be able to sprint faster, change direction better, and jump higher. And most importantly, we're going to be able to keep our athletes healthy by potentially decreasing injury rates.
Thanks, Dr. Suchamel, again for your very useful answers. I guess this conversation is going to end, but our cooperation is going to be continual, and our followers would take benefits from your knowledge in early future. Thanks again for accepting our invitation. Have a good day, Dr. Suchamel.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye.